Hello, it's your old friend Tom Meiser. I'm going to be starting a series of short videos that deal with a variety of topics, which I'm going to call My Thoughts on ... fill in the blanks. These videos will deal with a variety of topics, everything from my deep insights on political issues, my thoughts on faith, some practical application type videos for everyday life, and of course I will include some goofiness also. The videos are geared toward people who don't really have anything better to do than watch a video of me sharing thoughts on whatever the topic would have to be. So your life must be pretty exciting if you're watching this video right now. Anyway, I thought I would start out my first installment with actually producing a video on a topic that I actually know something about, and that is emergency care or first aid. Let me give you a little background on myself. I am a paramedic. I have been in emergency medical services now, in fact this month, for about 34 years. I started out in 1977 working for a local ambulance service right here in town, and I actually started full-time in EMS in 1980, and it has been my career now for over 30 years. It's been a very, very fulfilling career. During my tenure as a paramedic, I have encountered almost every type of medical emergency that you could possibly think of, from very serious injuries to medical situations such as heart attacks, strokes, seizures, just dealing with a variety of things. And I'm not going to try to pretend that I've seen everything in my career, because that would be quite impossible. Just about the time you think you've seen about everything, then something comes along that makes you go, whoa. So I am still learning. It's been a very fulfilling career, and something that's really helped me out dealing with emergency situations that I have encountered in my own life. The first installment of this video series that I'm going to call My Thoughts on First Aid is going to deal with the topic of preparedness. Emergency preparedness. Now, emergency preparedness has become kind of a catchphrase that's used these days, dealing with emergency preparedness on a local, state, or federal level, usually dealing with preparing for natural disasters or preparing for an attack or a terrorist incident, that kind of a thing. Emergency preparedness has kind of replaced a phrase that we used to be familiar with, if you're as old as I am, a phrase that we used to be familiar with called civil defense. Now, when I grew up, there were civil defense places all over my community. They used to call them bomb shelters. During the Cold War, it was thought that any day now the Russians were going to be invading the United States, or they might launch a nuclear missile, and we needed to be prepared in that event. I remember the videos that they used to produce in those days in the late 50s and into the early 60s, showing the classroom of students, and they show the flash of the nuclear blast, and they show the teacher instructing the students to get under your desk and cover up your head, as if that was really going to help of a nuclear attack. There were these businesses and factories all over town that were considered bomb shelters or fallout shelters in the event of some type of a terrible disaster that would happen. It was kind of a futile way for the communities or the public to be prepared in the event of something that would happen. I even remember growing up that there were some of our neighbors that had bomb shelters, which was essentially a bunker that was in the ground behind their house, about an 8 by 10 room that was made of cement block underground, and they had shelves built in there where they had canned goods stored, so in the event of a nuclear blast you could go underneath the ground, and you had provisions for probably about 6 months until the all clear came. However, what we learn about nuclear energy now is you would probably just about have to stay in that shelter for about 135 years for the dangerous radiation levels to finally dissipate. And I don't think there was a shelter probably built that would hold enough provisions for 135 years. So about the mid-60s, those kind of things went by the wayside. That concept is now, excuse me just a minute, been kind of replaced with this catchphrase, emergency management, or emergency preparedness. It's this idea of being ready for certain events to take place. Well, what I'd like to discuss is emergency preparedness on a more personal level. You know, in some ways, we always kind of do this. We already have provision for certain, to be prepared for certain emergencies, such as you keep a smoke detector battery ready to go. Always make sure the battery in your smoke detector is always good. You have a fire extinguisher in your kitchen should the pan catch on fire. You make sure that you're covered with homeowners insurance in the event that a tornado would come and blow your home away or your house would burn down. And so in some ways, we do prepare for these unexpected things that might occur in our lives. But the truth of the matter is, we aren't really prepared a lot of times when an emergency situation touches us personally. It's only a very small percentage of the society that goes out and takes a first aid or a CPR class. In fact, about only 8% of people in our country, and I did make that number up 8%, but I'm probably pretty close. Only a small percentage of people actually go out and get trained in first aid or CPR. And the majority of the people that do take the training do so because it's a requirement of their job to do so. So not many people really think too much about what am I going to do in these situations. For instance, what am I going to do if my child cuts a major artery and is bleeding severely, or even if I'm home alone and I injure myself severely, how would I manage that? Or my spouse has a heart attack or a seizure or is seriously injured, suffers an electric shock. These things that could happen potentially to us every day, we really don't give us much thought, and we really don't prepare in those areas. The problem with that is when an emergency does occur in our homes, we become panicked. And panic is the enemy. Panic is the biggest hindrance to us performing in an emergency situation. I'll give you an example. A few years back, I responded to a call where an elderly lady who lived alone was walking through her house and she bumped her leg on a piece of furniture in her bedroom. And she cut into a varicose vein on her leg. Just those little small superficial veins that you see on people's legs, especially as we grow older. She cut into a varicose vein and it started to bleed, and started to bleed rather severely. I hadn't really encountered this. I didn't realize that someone could bleed significantly from a varicose vein to the point that where they have significant blood loss, where they're going into shock and could possibly die. Well, to make a long story short, this woman called the ambulance, and when my partner and I arrived at the residence, this woman had bled significantly. I mean, her house looked like a crime scene, and she was laying in her kitchen, barely alive, pale, in significant shock, couldn't find a pulse. Her blood pressure was extremely low, in fact, so low that the bleeding had pretty much stopped. But if she had not called us when she did, she probably could have bled to death. Now, I said all this to say she panicked. If when she had cut that vessel in her leg, she just simply applied some direct pressure over the wound, she would have stopped the bleeding and she would have spared herself this life-threatening event that tended to take place. So I want to approach these short videos teaching you some simple first aid methods that you could use should an emergency arise in your life. The problem that I have with conventional first aid training is that I think it goes into too much science. I've never found a course that just dealt with practical approach to some first aid for common emergencies that we would encounter in our lives every day. For instance, if you cut a major artery in your arm and you're home alone, I don't think you're going to spend time thinking, I wonder how much hemoglobin I'll be losing. Gee, I bet I won't have many platelets left after this is all over. No, you want to figure out how to stop the freaking bleeding. You know, this is the kind of stuff I'm going to talk about. And I've already written several outlines for some future videos dealing with different medical emergencies and a very practical approach on how to manage those things before help arrives. And I'm hoping that these videos will be helpful, and I'm looking forward to future presentations. Well, I always have a scanner on in my house, and I'm hearing the Otsego first responders were just toned out, and they're going to an accident in Otsego where someone's experiencing some chest pain. I've had a scanner in my house ever since I've been in the profession. I always kind of like to keep track of what my fellow responders are doing. Getting back to the topics, is I want to form a series of videos that will be a very practical approach to first aid and common emergencies that you may encounter. Now, the teaching style that I have in these videos is actually how I teach classes. I am a first aid instructor for the National Safety Council. I'm also a CPR and first aid instructor for the American Heart Association, so I do go out and teach classes to community organizations and churches and that type of thing. And I just believe in presenting the material in a very practical manner, and that's what I'm going to attempt to do with this material as well. The next installment in my thoughts on first aid is going to be dealing with quite a misunderstood topic. We're going to be dealing with the topic of shock. Whew, that was close. Wow. I'm going to be dealing with the topic of shock because shock is one of the most misused terms out there. And I'm going to try to explain in very practical terms exactly what shock is, and we'll go into recognizing the causes of shock, recognizing the signs and symptoms of shock, and showing you some things to do if you see the signs and symptoms of shock, show you some of the interventions that you might be able to take. So I'm going to wrap this up right now on emergency preparedness, just to kind of recap some of the important points. It's important that you think of emergency preparedness as basically considering something that might happen and being ready when it does. Kind of like what if this or that happens? I know it's not a topic that many people like to talk about. You know, what if I fall downstairs and impale myself on a fence? It's something you don't want to think about very often. What if I cut my arm and I'm bleeding severely? What if I'm having chest pains, or my spouse is having a heart attack, or my child is having a seizure? What should I do? My goal is to present this material in a very practical manner so that you can use this information should you encounter any type of emergency situation that might arise in your life. I've got plans for several of these videos, and I don't know what the timeline is going to be for these videos to be released, but keep watching, and hopefully you'll find them informative, educational, and will help to enhance your life. Again, this is Tom Meiser, and I'll see you next time.